You are listening to E-Radio Show by Mist Apex. We are electric. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the E-Radio Show. I'm Matt Trumpets, and today's episode is called Just Deserts. I'm joined today by the one, by the only, Chris _Journo Stevens.com/exe. How's it going there, Chris?
Stevens.exe will stop working soon if you keep adding all those little bits to my name. I love it.
I was just inspired. What can I say? Anyway, before we get on with our actual show, I need to remind everyone we are an independent podcast hosted by MistApexPodcast.com, bringing you race reviews, news from the paddock, and tech analysis. This show is safe for work. We are keeping it clean here so you can play this with the kids in the background or at work. We live stream our race reviews, so be sure to subscribe to E-Radio Show on YouTube so you'll get a notification when we go live, and you can join our chat room as well. So, I take it there is some big, dirty news.
Big dirty news.
There's plenty of big dirty news, but before we get into the nitty-gritty of that, let's just remind ourselves of what happened in the last race, the season opener in Adria. I think most people will remember it for being quite a bonkers, chaotic race with a lot of penalties because of all the rain that we had during the morning, which meant teams couldn't properly simulate their cars and software-wise, and that meant a lot of mistakes were being made, a lot of power being overused, a lot of regen being overused as well. So that meant a lot of penalties. The likes of Verne and Lotterer, who were running 1 and 2, when they got given penalties. Ultimately, it went to Antonio Felix da Costa, his first win in FE. BMW Andretti winning on debut as a works entry. So really, really great stuff from them. But of course, the big question is that do Techeetah have the best car? Because they certainly came close to winning and were leading before they got those penalties. So will we get a better representation of the field in Marrakesh? That's the big question. And I think, assuming it stays dry, the answer to that one is going to be yes.
All right. I have a slightly different question because, I mean, I think it was fairly obvious Techeetah had the best car. The question to me is who looked like they could make up the ground between the last race and this race, because it has been a bit of extra time for people to get their software bugs sorted out, to get their brake-by-wire sorted out. And so, I mean, just looking back at the race, and we're coming up to Marrakesh here, which teams have the resources and the know-how to maybe be able to give them a run for their money this time around?
Well, you'd say the vast majority of them, surely, especially, you know, the likes of Jaguar and Audi and Virgin. Definitely, you know, I'm expecting to see their full potential this time in Marrakesh, because there was a test after the Adria race held in dry conditions, which they will have hugely appreciated, just to get some dry running in on an actual, you know, Formula E circuit, which of course they don't really do. Of course, public testing is held in Valencia, which is nothing like a Formula E circuit, and in private testing they can try to recreate a Formula E track as much as they like, but there's nothing really like running on an actual Formula E circuit and actually doing it in racing conditions. So this was about as close as they were going to get to that. And I'm sure that a lot of teams would have sat down and worked out where exactly the mistakes were made, how they can try to prevent them in the future in such extreme scenarios, which is what we saw in the first race. So that's why I'm not reading too much into Techeetah's pace. Certainly in that race, they seemed the quickest. Whether that is going to continue throughout the season, I have my doubts about that, because you know, we've seen so many teams look so dominant in one race and then they just fall back. I mean, let's think back to the first race from last season when Sam Bird won despite his drive-through penalty. Looked so utterly dominant, and yet it turned out his car was very much an underperformer throughout the season. So we're definitely going to be looking at a lot of things, and having all of the track time prior to qualifying this time. Having an actual FP1 and an FP2 in proper conditions, that's going to be a huge benefit, and we'll see the more natural order start to form.
All right. So along those lines, I assume you've looked at the forecast for this weekend. Is it going to rain again?
I doubt it. I mean, yeah, it's pretty cold in Marrakesh this time of year, but it is the desert, this like the proper desert this time. I'm going to be going through the desert on a horse with no name. I'll tell you that much. I'm really glad I managed to get that reference in. I'm so proud of myself.
I know you were excited about that before the show, so
yeah,
good for you.
Exactly. No, it should be right. Pretty cold, I will say. So actually, it's going to be a bit easier on the cars in terms of the battery temperatures. Of course, the hotter the ambient and the track temperature, the hotter the battery is going to get. And yeah, the McLaren battery doesn't overheat quite as easily as the old Williams battery, but any extra cooling is good because it means they don't have to run as much cooling and they can run a little bit quicker. So that should be good for them. It can run a bit harder, hopefully in the race. Perhaps it could even be that with fuel economy, that changes as the temperature goes up and down. So that's probably something we'll see. I'm hoping it doesn't become too easy for them, or we get like another safety car, because we saw in Adiria. With the safety car, they had a lot of energy to spare still at the end of the race.
Yeah, they had the safety car. Question, do you think, given the fact that it's a new spec tire, that the cold will have a similar effect on the teams? Or will they be able to figure out enough in the free practices to be able to get on top of the tires correctly?
Well, that's going to vary team on team. I doubt it's something that the simulations can replicate so accurately, to be honest. Of course, they will have done a lot of work in the simulators prior to this event. That is the best form of preparation you can take in Formula E, because you get so little track time. So that's something I expect. It will be a variable. I mean, we saw last year how Mahindra turned around their weekend after free practice right before qualifying, just by making small changes in the setup that affected the way the tires handled and reacted to the track. And they were probably going to be not in the points even before they made those changes, and they ended up winning that race with Felix Rosenqvist. So that is going to be a crucial factor going into this one. And this new Michelin tire does warm up a bit quicker than the old one. And has a bit of a wider operating window than the old one. So I'm not expecting it to be, as fiddly as it was in the previous 2 years that we've been racing in Marrakesh, but certainly it will be a factor.
All right, so I'm going to ask you the kind of question that when I'm on Mr. Apex always makes me go, oh man, I really should have looked at that. But we are coming back to Marrakesh. So where were the best places for passing last year? And are we actually, now that I think about it, do we have any, we don't have any advanced information on where or what the Hyperboost will be this time around. Oh, wait, maybe we do, a Chris Stevens exclusive. But regardless of that, are we expecting, because we didn't see it play out in Adria so much, are we expecting to see the strategy implications of the Hyperboost finally play out, assuming the safety car doesn't once again get involved?
Yeah, I think so. The annoying thing about the safety car is we saw a bunch of guys just take it under the safety car. And this being a semi-permanent facility, and less like a Formula E track with a lot of closed barriers. There are obviously a lot of closed barriers, but there's actually escape roads and runoff areas and things like that. So I think you're less prone to a safety car here than certainly say the track in Adiria, where there was no margin for error except at like one corner, I think it was. So I think it's less likely we'll have it interrupted. The attack mode this time is more where we expected it to be. Of course, drivers were really confused when it was put on the exit of a corner on the inside, and they were concerns about the fact that you were going to have to go way slower into the corner to make it. If you had somebody close behind you, they wouldn't know you're about to go and take it, so they might slam into the back of you in the braking zone. this is a much more, I want to say traditional, but I can't say traditional because it's only the second time we've actually used it. But it's much more what we were expecting. It's been placed on the outside of turn 3, a long left-hander, specifically right towards the end of the corner. So I imagine they'll have to go wide into the first bit to make the whole thing. So you go the long way around turn 3, and you probably will lose a couple of places doing that, especially if you're in the pack. The gain, I think, might be a bit bigger in Adira, depending, of course, on how long they can use it for, because, of course, that information is all kept hush-hush until right before the race. But there are more straights here compared to other circuits because it's more of a semi-permanent facility. So I think we're going to be seeing overtakes into turn 1. Into turn 3, we can see overtakes there into the chicane at 4 and 5. People tend to pounce at turn 10, although you can get that very, very wrong, as the two Venturi boys proved last year as they came together. And turn 11 is a really good overtaking spot at the end of the straight. That's where Rosenqvist made the pass for the lead on Buemi last year. So there are a lot of opportunities. I don't think we're in for a dull one. Put it that way.
No, it doesn't sound like it. And I'm excited to see sort of the more traditional, although it's not really traditional placement, because I think that you will lose less time going around the outside, and it's just less awkward. I imagine we'll see fewer people missing it. Hello, Pachito.
Yes. yeah, definitely. It was a really odd placement, and I think there were definitely better places they could have put it. But we'll see it. We'll see it come good this time. I mean, there was some driver criticism of it in Adira, not least the placement, and also they just don't like the fact that they lose time doing anything. They just want the benefit of attack mode, not the losing time part. So we'll see it play out properly.
Good. Well, and if you're looking at these track characteristics, you say they're more straights. Historically, are any of the teams we're used to watching, have they tended to have the advantage on tracks like this? I mean, is this going to be more of an Audi track because traditionally they've had sort of the better efficiency in the race? Or is Season 5 just really tossed all that out the window?
I think Season 5 is going to toss it out the window, yeah. We have had the same podium 2 years running in slightly different order, but it's been Rosenqvist, Buemi, and Bird on the podium in both races. Now, of course, that's already going to change because young Froyo isn't racing anymore. And Buemi, in the position he's in at the moment, I'd be surprised to see him on the podium, to be honest. But, they go really strong here. Bird, I might expect to be up there because I think Virgin should unlock a bit more of their potential because, as you know, Audi and Virgin were two teams penalised quite heavily after qualifying. For their energy and the power spikes because of the software issues. So I think if they can keep it all together, we should see them come good finally.
Yeah, okay, so I'm going to ask you this. I know that from talking other sports, it's been a very big deal, the arrest of Carlos Ghosn, because Renault and Nissan they weren't merged, but Renault brought them out of bankruptcy in 2000. And that as the years went on, it was Nissan that had gained more financial ascendancy and there'd been increasing unhappiness. Ghosn had planned essentially what amounts to a merger, a more close working together of the two companies. But the person he appointed to Nissan, who was his former protege, has actually turned the tables on him, and now there might be a split. Buemi is a Renault driver, is he not?
No. Informally, he's contracted to EDAMS.
Okay.
And not the manufacturer. That's always been the case. When it was Renault EDAMS, he was an EDAMS driver, and he's still an EDAMS driver, even though the team is backed by Nissan. Of course, he's also a Toyota driver in the World Endurance Championship, and that contract kind of takes precedent over everything else.
Yes, as long, I guess, you just put the blinders on and ignore what happens out of your sight, I suppose. But have you heard, I mean, I know certainly in the Formula One world it's been speculated on, because if this merger doesn't go forward, costs for both corporations will change. Have you heard anything from your side as to if this is going to have any impact on the team or not.
The line that I will always get from either Renault or Nissan is that everything happening there is not going to affect. It's certainly not going to affect the racing teams. That may or may not be true. It may affect the company as a whole, but in terms of the racing teams, that may not be the case. I am hoping to get a few more answers on that shortly, though. So next week I'll come back to you with that.
Okay, good, because I was curious about that, because I'd heard it talked about only in terms of Formula One, but I mean, hello, Nissan is a team in Formula E. They've just taken it over, and not to spoil anything, looking at who they're bringing in for testing and stuff like that, it seems like they are putting some effort into it this season.
Well, I compared to Formula One, Formula E is quite low on the radar, I think. Especially in terms of cost.
Right.
I mean, you should look at the amount of money being poured into the Formula One program. Money that was saved by Renault pulling out of FE as well. By comparison, Formula E is just is a tip.
Yeah,
basically.
I think if you want the number, I believe it was reported as 190 million for Renault last season.
There you go. That is probably
190 times,
about
19 times, somewhere in there.
About 85 times less.
Yeah, no, it's a staggering difference, and yeah, what bang for the buck they get out of it as well. All right, so what are we expecting from Audi then? They to me, they looked in the last race like they were really far off the pace, and it wasn't just the software. So what? Is this something they can come back from this quickly, or did you get a sense that it's going to take them longer to sort their issues out?
Well, Audi managed to turn things around rather quickly last season, and I think they could do the same again. I think, given where Lucas started after his qualifying penalty, to come back to ninth was actually quite impressive. Daniel Abt, on the other hand, really was struggling. And some of the comments he made after the race were quite worrying as well, in terms of just couldn't understand there was no pace. And because he wasn't the one penalised. He wasn't penalised in the race, wasn't penalised in qualifying. So that was his actual pace. And he only just came ahead of Lucas. Now, of course, the safety car played a role in that as well, but he was quite confused as to why he didn't have pace in the race. Of course, having the post-race test might have helped him in that regard. It could have swung things around entirely. I mean, we saw it last season. There was only one in-season test, and that was just the rookie test as well. It wasn't even the actual race drivers involved in that. And we saw how much that turned things around for the championship, for Techeetah especially. That extra day where they had Fred Makowiecki and James Rossiter in the car, they managed to just make things click, especially for Andre Lotterer as well, who was suddenly on Jev's pace in Santiago, and they scored the first 1-2 finish in Formula E history. And this season we have 3 in-season tests with Adiria, this rookie test in Marrakesh, and there's one supposedly happening after Mexico City as well. So we could see huge flip-flops in performance just in a couple of races. And I think that's going to be a big part of people being able to turn around their championships, or maybe even lose a lot of time. Because we saw Renault Edams last season really went in the wrong direction in one test, and that defined their whole season. So there's scope for improvement for all teams because of these tests.
Okay, so you mentioned Lotterer. I'm going to ask now, do you get the sense, is this going to be a thing if he winds up winning a race or several races, or regularly finishing ahead of Verne, which I think might now be possible? Are we going to see that start to cause the bromance crumble?
That's a really great question. We're not going to know, are we, until
No.
it actually happens, because they are the 2 broiest teammates in the world. And I think they have that, well, certainly last season they had that perfect relationship of we get on great off the track, and on the track you're just that little bit slower than me that I know I could beat you. And if occasionally he beat me, it didn't really matter to Jev all that much, to be honest. Like in Rome, I mean, he knew he was struggling anyway, and he could explain it. And 9 times out of 10, Jev would beat Andre. So, yeah, what's going to happen when Andre starts? And I do think this is going to start to happen at some point, because Andre really, really came on during his rookie season. It started off absolutely nowhere, ended the season on a really, really good high, nudging on Jev's pace. And now that I think that the cars are easier to manage in terms of the braking because of the brake-by-wire systems, that's only going to help him a little bit. And of course, he wasn't really all that far off Jev in Adria, was he? So it's so bizarre, because I've always disagreed with the term teammate, because you don't really get on with people in the same team, because you're competing and you've got equal machinery, and that you tend not to get on, because if one beats you, and then you don't like that, obviously. Whereas these two seem to be able to surpass it. But what happens when it starts to become race wins that are on the cards for the pair of them that they're competing for? And of course, they seem to get through Santiago relatively okay, despite the clash.
Yeah,
well, so I think the relationship will survive.
Yeah. I think the interesting, for me, from the psychological point of view, is if Lauder achieves even, or perhaps he winds up being faster, not just for a singular event, but if it starts to look like a roll, a couple in a row, that's I hate to say, but I think that's where all the drama will come from, if there's going to be drama.
That's a tall order, though. I got to say, it's a real tall order for Andre. I would say he's really, really lucky to have Jev as a teammate, but also unlucky in the terms of Autosport rated John Oakland as the 3rd best driver in the world of 2018. That is a high benchmark that he's got to try and hit.
Yes, but he's not the one with the pressure on his shoulders in a lot of the way. So that's where the fun always comes from. All right, so we've talked about that. Are we expecting to see Mahindra back in action and sorted out?
Fully, yeah. I mean, the podium in Adria for Drome was really, really cool. I would be surprised if they weren't in the hunt. Having been in the hunt for the last 2 years as well, they know the track really well. They know how to be successful around it. Do they know how to be successful around it with the new car? That's a different issue. The new tires as well, of course, and of course 2 new drivers, and of course this time Pascal is making his debut. So that's going to be something that we have to try and keep an eye on. Expecting a baptism of fire, as it usually is for most rookies. So I'd be surprised if he's on Jerome's pace straight away. But Verline making his FU debut is something that I think a lot of the fans are going to want to see, and they're looking forward to.
Okay. I'm going to ask about another F1, I hate to call him a reject, but shall we say has moved on from, would be Van Dorn, because of all the sort of F1 people that showed up. His qualifying lap in the wet made me think, wow, that's what we were waiting for all last season with McLaren, and we never got it. So how's the team? Does he have a chance to play in the top 10, do you think, this time around? I mean, I know you say everybody does, but...
Well, everybody does,
but...
except, I have now that we have a proper rookie customer team, I have an exception to my rule, and every rule needs an exception to make it a rule. In all honesty, and HWA is that exception. They are the one team that I do not expect to be, top 10 contenders, because just look at the expertise that is around them. How do you compete with that? Especially when Venturi had such a difficult race in Adria, and of course Venturi are the ones supplying their powertrain. Now, of course, I think Felipe Massa would have scored points in that race with Venturi had he not been very heavily penalised for multiple technical offences. So there's hope for them there, but then even by Venturi's benchmark, would you expect this rookie team to then beat a team that's been in FE since the beginning? and should have won the first race, that got there like that. So even by that standard, if Venturi finishes 7th, I'd be surprised to see an HWA 10th, for example, just because there's so much they don't know. Yeah, and of course they're not really doing the work for this season, are they? They're doing the work for Mercedes for next season in preparation for all that. So it's good that they get things wrong now, to be honest, because you'd rather get it wrong now than when Mercedes come in as a full works entry and takes over the team. So, yeah, as you mentioned, the qualifying performance in Nadira was spectacular and exactly what I've been expecting of Van Dorn since he graduated from GP2. Unfortunately, McLaren never gave him the tools to do that. And hopefully he will with HWA. And there is a chance of him getting the Mercedes seat as well, because he's just taken on a Mercedes F1 simulator role as well. So he's actually becoming quite tied in, with the brand, with the company. So when it comes to, Mercedes picking and choosing between its drivers, for who gets the work seat in season 6, it could be Van Dorn there.
All right, so maybe help me out here, because I'm a little confused. HWA is basically a placeholder team for Mercedes.
Yeah.
So Mercedes will be as a proper mark in the series for season 6.
Yes, along with Porsche as well, because HWA is like one of its motorsport subdivisions. They're the team that ran its DTM entries, and of course they pulled out DTM to do Formula E.
Right. So what you're saying is Van Dorn might be kept on when Mercedes comes in as the factory driver in that seat.
Potentially, yeah. Of course, Mercedes have a flock of drivers to choose from.
Do.
And of course, there's a couple on the list for the rookie test that we'll sort of go through in a little bit as well. But the fact that, he'll already have FE experience at this point, and if he keeps, punching in the qualifying laps, it'll be easier for him to show the pace in qualifying, because there's less time or fewer opportunities for mistakes and errors, and the rookie status to play its card as well, because over a race distance, that shows, especially because there was an error in the race last season where he dinked the wall a little bit, and that kind of sort of run down the order even more. Of course, nobody expected him to finish where he started, because that would be preposterous for his and the team's first race. But I think if they manage to get some top 15s, maybe is the opportunity. As long as they're not the slowest car on the track, that's got to be the aim for them, because they're the newest team. There's not really much else they can aim for.
Yeah, no, it's decidedly going to be an information gathering year for them, and for the drivers too, I would expect. Although I did have this momentary flash when you said that could you imagine Ocon and Van Dorn in Formula E? Like, how mental would that be? And then I thought maybe Formula One should require each of its leading drivers to do one Formula E race a year in the factory mark, just for publicity purposes, and that would just be insane. But I should probably stop before I get into trouble with people who are fans of the sport. My mind just, I you know what it is? I've had the extra espresso today, so I'm going to just be very tangential in all of my comments. So what have I missed? Is there anything else that we should be thinking about or preparing for when we're looking at the race this week? And what are the storylines that I've missed in talking to you? Anything that you want to bring up?
I'll tell you what I'm going to really keep an eye out is Dragon's pace, because it really took me by surprise how quick Jose Maria Lopez was in Addiria. Not so much in qualifying, but the fact that he managed to maintain a really strong position in the race before his suspension gave up. I'm really keen to see how he does in a more normal race, with a more normal qualifying as well, because that wasn't a car I expected to be able to compete for the front row of the grid or battle for the podium, especially in the first race, given where the team has been in the last few years, with very few signs of being able to improve. But maybe if this is their genuine pace, that might explain what's been going on for the past couple of seasons, to be honest. And Maxi Gunter, I'm hoping he has a cleaner weekend as well in the other Dragon. And I think keep an eye out on Neo as well. Of course, that was another team where we barely saw their potential because they had both their cars thrown out of qualifying and they weren't able to score points after that. So again, clean weekend. Hopefully we'll see their potential. But even remember last season, I was probably half the way through the season and saying we still haven't seen this team's potential or this team's potential. So I'm an optimist, but I have to be realistic at some point.
Yeah, no, and I think that's kind of the fun thing with the new set of regulations is, that whatever it hadn't gotten predictable, but in a wider sense, it had started to get a little predictable. We knew that these 4 or 5 guys were going to be fighting it out for, and we knew that these 2 or 3 teams were going to be, and maybe after 3 or 4 race run, you'd get one team in there and another team dropping back. But just looking at all the software problems everybody had, and looking ahead to the race and the new regulations, it could just really be a race by race, entirely different set of folks at the top, except for, I would say, I would look for Techeetah to be there or thereabouts for a big chunk of the season.
I'd throw BMW Andretti into that mix as well, I reckon.
Yeah, I know. And then I'm thinking, oh, but wait, Evans, Jaguar, what about them? And it's really hard, right?
But Evans hasn't even stood on the podium yet. How is this possible?
I don't know. He's so fast, yet manages. He's very good at just missing a podium, I suppose.
Oh, that's harsh.
Yeah.
That's harsh. I think he's incredibly unlucky. Last season, he could have had 5 or 6 podiums.
Yeah. Rub it in, why don't you?
I hope he isn't listening. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Mitch.
Yeah, if you're listening, we don't mean it. Come on the show anytime.
Yeah, definitely. I'll ask him in Marrakesh.
All right. Well, speaking of Marrakesh, in addition to all the racing we're looking forward to, there is yet another rookie test. So who do you want to talk about? What has caught your incredibly professional and discerning eye as far as teams and drivers?
Of course, I think the headline act, as it were, in this one is Sergei Sirotkin with Mahindra. Sirotkin's kind of scoping out what he might do in 2019 in terms of racing. I think if the smart money is probably taking the SMP racing seat in LMP1. If he can, of course, SMP being his big backer throughout his entire racing career, basically. And of course, you would have seen it, when he was at Williams in Formula One last season as well. And I feel bad for Sergei because, he did everything right, really, didn't he? He beat his teammate, even though he was a rookie. And yet he was the one, out in the cold. There's still some debate about whether SMP pulled him or if he was pushed off the edge. But, we'll probably never find out the real answer on that one, to be honest. But but Formula E is an option for him, and he's said as much, that he could find a way into Formula E. Probably not for this season, obviously, unless one of the teams is really unhappy with how one of their guys is doing. But if he's looking at Formula E, it's probably more for season 6. And of course, it's not uncommon for World Endurance and Formula E to swap drivers a lot. I have the pair of them. I think there's like 6 guys are running both this year. So that's getting busy, and really the FIA are going to have a tough time trying to make the series not clash like they did in 2017, of course. The other one for me, and this is unconfirmed, but Dragon supposedly are going to have Felipe Nasr in the car, which is interesting. Of course, another ex F1 Sauber this time. Again, this is unconfirmed, and we don't have anything official on it yet. But it's quite an interesting one for me, because I feel it's quite random, a bit out of the blue, really. But I guess if Naz's looking, or if Dragon just needed a second guy, really, because of course they got their test and reserve driver Antonio Fuoco in there. You remember he tested in Valencia as well. So you don't want to just run one car basically because you're only getting half the data, which oddly enough might be the situation that Neo is in because they only have Jamie Chadwick, who ran in Adiria, lined up at the moment. The second seat is still to be confirmed. Other big names include triple Le Mans winner Benoit Treluet in at Virgin Racing alongside Nick de Vries. Of course, he'll be at ART Grand Prix in the Formula 2 season this year. So that's one to watch for the title this year, actually. Some returning names like Pietro Fittipaldi in the Jaguar. Harry Tinknell's now back at Jaguar as well. Did a stint at Neo as their sim driver. Actually, here's a good one. Is Arthur Leclerc, the brother of Charles,
Yes.
2019 F1 Ferrari driver. It's 17 years old, I think he is. And he's on Venturi's kind of next generation driver scheme, which is kind of how they market, how they label it. And he was the first guy to shake down the Venturi Gen 2 car. So
didn't know that.
his little statement there. And Norman Nato in alongside him, who is their development driver. It gets so confusing, all these teams, because they have some of them will just have a test and reserve, and then some of them have a development and a sim driver and a reserve driver as well. It gets quite confusing between a lot of them. Nissan EDAMS is unsurprising. They've got the sim driver Jan Mardenborough in there, and 2017 Japanese F3 champion Mitsunori Takaboshi in there as well, who is the reserve driver. And BMW obviously got two of their guys in, Bruno Spengler, who did most of the private testing with them, and Marco Wittmann making his Formula E debut, as it were. You'll recognize him from DTM if you've been watching that.
Well, I gotta say, I'm surprised that they have a former Ghostbuster testing for BMW.
Do I get that reference?
Have you ever seen the movie Ghostbusters?
Not all the way through.
One of the characters is named Spengler.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
yeah.
Formula E's got a young audience. This podcast probably does as well. I'm sure
there's probably people out there going, "What?" All right, sorry.
They would have said what that movie with the 5 women and
which was a good one. I will say I liked that.
I heard terrible things about it, but we'll move on from that. Well, we can start a sister podcast where we review movies.
Yeah.
Interesting choice from HWA actually is Raffaele Marciello, the Blancpain GT champion and Mercedes driver. So again, with the Mercedes links in that team, it kind of makes sense. But of all the drivers in the Mercedes pack, Marciello was a surprising one for me. But then I think quite a lot of their other drivers already have FE experience and already have the E license, which excludes you from this rookie test. And of course, in the other car, they got Daniel Juncadella, who you remember from Valencia, stood in for Van Dorn when he couldn't drive because he had to go to do the US Grand Prix that week. So that's basically they're the kind of headline acts and the ones you should be looking out for. Amongst them, the others are, the reserve drivers, basically Nico Muller in the Audi. They've got their other DTM guy, Jamie Green, in there as well. James Rossiter and Tatiana Calderon and DS the Cheetahs. There's nothing unusual about them. So yeah, for the most part, it's a lot of test and reserves, development drivers and sim drivers, but there are some interesting choices in there as well.
Yeah, it is interesting. I had two thoughts while you were talking about all those drivers. One is thinking about Sirotkin. I'm guessing for what sponsorship he had to bring to Williams. I mean, it seems like to me he could, with that same amount of money, actually buy and run a Formula E team. If I'm not entirely mistaken, I mean, I would guess, what are we talking, 15 to 30 mil at least? That should about do the trick, yeah?
No, it was more like 50 to 60 because I remember Kubica was bringing 30 mil in his sponsorship, and Sirotkin said, "I'll double that."
Yowza.
Basically.
I mean, just why bother? Buy a Formula E team, be done with it. The other thing is Felipe Nasr, who was sort of known as a pay driver, but was quick. He's racing at the Daytona 24, and he did last year. And one of the things I remember when I looked at someone put out the average lap times, is he was either first, second, or third quickest of the DPI drivers last year in terms of his lap times. So he, whatever reputation he had from Formula One, he is a quick driver. So I'd be very curious to see how he gets on in testing and what kind of lap times he's able to put together. But yeah, I know he does the sports cars in the U.S., so this might actually be a nice match for him because it's similar to the WEC crossover as well.
Definitely. He certainly found success in other categories, hasn't he, since his Formula One career ended. There probably is a reason somewhere along the lines of with the sports car, the DPI stuff, that why it hasn't been announced just yet. Of course, it may not happen because why else would they have not announced it already? We're only a few days from the test actually taking place, so I'm assuming there's some issue that needs to be resolved, some minor issue, before that gets properly announced, if it does end up happening, that is.
All right, well, do you have anything else for us before we go to plug all of the things?
No, let's go straight to the plugging.
All right, where can we find you, Chris Stevens, online?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at @cstevens_journo, and all my written work is all in my own personal website, ejournoonline.com.
Excellent. And of course, don't forget, you can catch us on Twitter at eRadioShow. And if you were part of our Missed Apex Slack group, be sure to join #Formula E as well. As for me, I'm at MattPT55 on the internet. Come tell me how wrong I am about all the things. And remember, chicks dig heels, wounds cause scars, and glory is a fungible concept under certain philosophical precepts. This has been eRadio Show.